Let's talk about Columbia University, the pros, the cons, and how to get in. Columbia is an Ivy League university, and it's the only Ivy League that's located in the heart of New York City. And what's great about that, if you've never been to New York, is that many people consider New York the greatest city in the world. And the city is really an extension of the campus. So when you go to Columbia, not only do you have access to this world-class education, but you also have access to the best of everything. You have incredible diversity in the city. You've got great restaurants of all kinds. You've got museums, you've got shows, you've got Broadway plays, you've got guest speakers coming. You've got some of the best companies in the world there, so you can do internships and jobs. So really a big plus for a lot of students who go to Columbia is the city of New York. You can't talk about Columbia University without talking about its famous core curriculum. And this is something that students at Columbia have a love-hate relationship with. What is the core curriculum? Well, most Ivy League schools and most top universities have some requirements that all students need to take in order for them to graduate. For most of the Ivy Leagues, it's called distribution requirements. So you've got to take some science classes, you've got to take some math classes, you've got to take a writing class, you've got to take something else in the humanities. And this ensures that you get a broad-based liberal arts education. And the only exception to this is Brown. At Brown, you can take whatever you want. You can take music theory classes for every term and still graduate. But all the other Ivies require some sort of distribution requirements. Columbia takes this one step further, and they have the most aggressive or prominent curriculum. And what that means is that anywhere from a third of your courses at Columbia to a half of your courses will be consumed by these curriculum requirements. And they're very specific, which means that a lot of students at Columbia, your classmates, will all be taking the exact same classes. And they'll really teach you important concepts in Western thought, Western politics and ideas, art, history, culture. And the goal is to make sure that when you do graduate from Columbia, you really have a good, solid liberal arts education. You can speak intelligently about our government and our culture and philosophies that have influenced our nation, all of those key things. But the prohibitive aspect is that it takes up so much of your time at school. And so if you want to, for example, do a dual major at Columbia, it's really hard to fit in all of those courses because up to half of your slots are filled with these core curriculum requirements. So it's just one of those things that students have a love-hate relationship with. They love the fact that it teaches them great ideas, and most of the courses are these small 20-person seminars, which lend themselves to great stimulating debate and discussion. But on the other hand, it could feel kind of prohibitive if you don't have enough time to take what you want to take. What are some of the pros of Columbia? Well, the first is New York City itself. So Columbia's campus is located on the Upper West Side of Manhattan in a neighborhood called Morningside Heights. And it's really accessible to everything that New York has to offer. New York is a very walkable city, which is great. You don't need a car. And in fact, it would be really difficult if you had a car. And you can get anywhere using the subway system. So while Columbia's campus is located a little bit out of the way on the Upper West Side, it's an easy 10, 15, 20-minute ride to the heart of the city and anywhere you want to go, which is great. And so, as I mentioned, you have unlimited access to the best of everything. You can go to cultural events, you can go to shows, you can go to any kind of restaurant you could possibly think of. And that's really extraordinary to have. The only downside to that, well, there are a few downsides to that, but one I'll just mention is that it could get really expensive. New York is a very expensive city. And so if you're always looking for entertainment options off campus, that could really start to hurt your wallet. Another pro of Columbia is that it's the most diverse Ivy League university. So at Columbia, about 30% of the undergraduate population is white. And you compare that with 50% at Dartmouth, which is the least diverse, or about 35 to 40% at all the other Ivy Leagues. So it has the smallest Caucasian population. Columbia also has the largest international population of all the Ivy Leagues. It has about 16% international students versus about 10% for the other Ivy Leagues. So Columbia, just like New York City itself, is really a rich melting pot of diverse backgrounds, ethnicities, and cultures. And a third pro of Columbia is the strength of its writing programs. Columbia is one of those universities like Princeton and like Brown that's famous for the quality of its writing in its undergraduate education. So what that means is that in a lot of your courses, instead of just taking tests and exams, you'll actually have to write research papers. You'll have to do a thesis like at Princeton. You have to do a lot of writing. And Columbia is known for the just terrific writing quality of its undergraduates. What are some of the cons of Columbia? The first con is that the school lacks a lot of school spirit. You compare this with some of the other Ivies like Yale or Cornell or Dartmouth, which have tremendous school spirit. And at Columbia, there's just really not that much at all. And it could be because of a few reasons. Part of it is because New York City itself probably draws a lot of students off campus. So in spending time together, bonding with each other, students at Columbia kind of go off and do their own thing. And students at Columbia kind of complain that there's no real social center on campus. So there's no central meeting place where all students gather. Students are just kind of off doing their own thing. And similarly, Columbia isn't known for its athletics. It's really de-emphasized at the school, kind of in a similar way it is at Brown. And sometimes athletics have a way of bringing students together when they kind of cheer on the team for the big game. Students at Columbia just really aren't into sports and athletics very much. The athletic fields are off campus. You know, you've got to take a subway to get there. It's kind of inconvenient. So there isn't that kind of central feeling of school spirit and student bonding. A second potential con of Columbia is that it's known as being a grind school. This is similar to Princeton and it's similar to Cornell, but Columbia courses are notoriously difficult. Professors give a ton of homework. Students at Columbia always report feeling overstressed, overworked. They're always worried that they're not studying enough. A disproportionate amount of their time is spent just grinding away at their course load. A third con of Columbia is that there's no real space to do anything. Because you're located in New York City, which is an extremely overpopulated city to begin with, space is always at a premium, and there's just not a lot of it. So it starts with the fact that Columbia's campus is by far the smallest in all the Ivy Leagues. It does have its own campus, so it's not just kind of part of New York City the way, say, NYU is, where you can't even distinguish where the campus starts and ends. Columbia does have its own campus, and it's quite beautiful, and it's safe, but it's really small. And similarly, students complain that when they go to the dining hall, there's long wait lines. And then even when you get your food, you can't find a place to sit. There's no tables that are open. And when you want to study in the library, there's no good study spaces. And all the good study spaces are already reserved. This is just kind of a common complaint about students at Columbia, is that there's no space for anything. And a final potential con is that New York City is not for everybody. Yes, it's sometimes known as the greatest city in the world and has so much to offer, but it's also loud, it's crowded, it's polluted. There's many areas that are quite dangerous. It's not like a beautiful European city like Paris, where you just feel like you're in heaven. New York is gritty. That's just kind of the personality it has. So while you have access to everything, you really kind of have to be tough. And if you're not tough, then it could be a little scary. How to get into Columbia? Well, let's start with the fact that Columbia really attracts urban intellectuals. And what I mean by that is at Columbia, there's a de-emphasis on athletics. So you won't find a lot of scholar athletes the way you'll find at like Princeton or Dartmouth, where seemingly everyone plays a Division I sport. Columbia students are much more focused on their academics. They tend to be very intellectual. They tend to be very heady. They tend to have urban taste. They tend to be kind of urbane in the sense that they're a little more sophisticated and worldly, which is part of what draws them to New York City. So it's definitely kind of like a nerdy intellectual atmosphere. And that's the kind of student that they really kind of attract. Another tip for getting into Columbia University is to apply to Barnard College. So Columbia University is divided into several different undergraduate schools. There's Columbia College, which is its main liberal arts school. And then there's the School of Engineering. And then there's the School of General Studies, which is for older students who have been out of school for a few years. And then there's also this fourth school. It's Barnard College. And it's an all-women's college that's part of Columbia University. And the advantage to applying to Barnard, if you're a female or if you just identify as female, is that you have a much better chance of getting into the Columbia University system. And Barnard is located right across the street from Columbia. And students from both colleges take courses at each other's schools. So you have men from Columbia College taking courses at Barnard College and vice versa. Students at Barnard get to take advantage of everything at Columbia, the same clubs, you eat in the same dining halls, you could even live on campus in certain situations. You basically get the same education. And when you graduate, your diploma says both Barnard College and Columbia University. So people sometimes say, wow, well, like, job recruiters or graduate schools, will they look down on it because it's Barnard and not Columbia? And a few might, but most won't. And you could even just put Columbia University on your resume anyway, and it won't make a difference. But the best part about applying to Barnard College instead of Columbia College is that you have a much better chance of getting in, particularly if you apply early decision. So if you apply regular decision, the acceptance rates are fairly similar. It's about 9% acceptance rate for Barnard versus about 6% acceptance rate for Columbia. It's very difficult to get into both schools. But when you talk about early decision, it's really different. Columbia University, if you apply to Columbia College, it has only about a 10% early decision admission rate. But if you apply to Barnard, it's about a 30% admission rate. It's a huge improvement. So if you know that that's where you want to go, I want to study at Columbia University, and I'm willing to make that binding commitment, then it could really be to your advantage to just simply apply early decision to Barnard. And it's also worth knowing that at Barnard, 62% of their freshman class, this was the class of 26, 62% of their class was made up of early decision candidates. So you can see that that's one school that really likes to give priority to early decision candidates. Another great tip for getting into Columbia University is to apply to the School of General Studies. What is it? Well, Columbia has a specific segment of its undergraduate population that is in its own distinct college, and it's called the School of General Studies. And it's meant for students who are looking to go back to college, transferring from another school, or maybe they took some time off because they graduated high school, then they went to the military, and now 6 or 7 years later, they want to get their college degree. They call these non-traditional students, and they're usually a little older. So the average age of the students at the School of General Studies is 27 years old, as opposed to maybe 19 years old at the regular Columbia College. So if you fit their criteria and you've been, you took a year off between high school and college, or you were in the military, or you can only go to school part-time, some other situation like that, you can apply to the School of General Studies instead. The best part is that the acceptance rate at the School of General Studies is significantly better than the acceptance rate at Columbia College. How much better? Well, at Columbia College, you have about a 6% admission rate. At the School of General Studies, it's about a 30% acceptance rate, significantly better. And it's even better if you transfer in from another college. The transfer rate is about 60%, which is crazy when you think that you can get into Columbia University as a transfer student with a 60% acceptance rate. But that's no typo. That's truly what it is. And it's because the school really wants to have an arm of its undergraduate department which caters to a more diverse and non-traditional set of students. Students who come from the military, students who transfer in from community college, students who come from low-income, diverse ethnic backgrounds, all of that. That's really who it caters to. And your education at Columbia will be virtually identical to what it is for students at the other colleges. Your degree will say both School of General Studies and Columbia University. And again, it's kind of the issue like with Barnard. Well, will job recruiters care that I didn't graduate from Columbia College? Like, will they care that it was one of these other colleges within Columbia? And the truth is, like, a few places might care. A few places might say, oh, well, you didn't have like the chops to get into Columbia College, or, you didn't go through all those same courses and all that kind of stuff. But I would say the vast majority of places don't really care. You still have a Columbia University degree. And I think many places would argue that there are advantages to the fact that you did other things, that you went to a community college first, or that you served in the military first. So anecdotally, it depends on who you ask. But this is an incredible way to get into Columbia University with much better acceptance rates. Another tip for getting into Columbia is to apply early decision. The boost that you get in your acceptance rates is not as great as you get at some of the other Ivies, So at Columbia, maybe regular decision rate is about 6%, and the early decision acceptance rate is about 11%. So it's a multiple of 2. It's better than nothing, but that probably, again, has more to do with the better caliber of the early decision applicant pool, less than it does have to do with some kind of admissions advantage that you get. And when you compare it to some of the other Ivies like Dartmouth, Cornell, UPenn, Brown, those schools give you a much bigger admissions boost, mission boost when you apply early decision. So Columbia is actually just a small boost. If you know it's your #1 school, you can absolutely apply their early decision. But if you're thinking that Columbia and several of those other Ivies are kind of equally on your top list, you may give preference to one of the other Ivies to apply early decision to, because they give you a much better admission chance. And a final tip for getting into Columbia is to submit your ACT or SAT score. Like all the Ivies, Columbia is test optional, so you don't have to submit your scores with your application. But for the class of 26, 70% of students who were accepted to Columbia submitted either their SAT or ACT. So just looking at those numbers, 70% of students in their freshman class all submitted their scores. They obviously give preference to those students. 30% got in without those scores. But you also have to think that oftentimes those are students with special circumstances. They were recruited for one reason or another. They're children of faculty, their parents donated a building, whatever it is. So my advice for all the Ivy Leagues is to submit your scores. First take a test prep course, spend 6 months, 9 months, whatever it takes to get a really good score. Something in the vicinity of about 1550 on the SAT or 34, 35 on the ACT. And then submit those scores if at all possible.